Family, am I audible to all? Am I audible to all? Hopefully, I am audible. Can I heard? I think I'm hearing an echo. There it is. That clears it up. Good, 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 good. So, first of all, I have some amazing news. I have some amazing news. If any of you guys, and several of you guys are familiar with the artist Chinchilla, she actually shouted us out on Instagram, which was phenomenally cool. Amazing. And so if you go on her Instagram, you'll see a little clip of Mr. Biscuit Reacts, which is really, really dope. And also, because so many of you guys have been asking to do a response to chalk outlines with Ren and Chinchilla, Black Pegasus has dropped both he and I together in his studio responding to that. So after this, make sure to go and check that out. There's lots and lots and lots of different things which are coming. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this. Also, for you guys keeping on top of me about Ren Chapter 8, that is going to be dropping tonight. Um, that's going to be dropping tonight. And look, guys, none of it is my fault. Nothing. I take no responsibility. It is snowball, comrades. Tactics. um, and listen, on that Ren Chapter 8, we actually have merch. Some of you guys have seen the merch in the Discord server. So definitely appreciate you guys. I also want to do a couple of shout outs. You guys know Joanne on Discord. She's MANCJOROT, MANC, I think, from Manchester. She has been so pivotal in helping me. If any of you guys have any insight into what we should do, understand this is a community. It is a community and all the help that I could get. I mean, listen, I have no idea what's going on in Discord. I am learning just like you guys. Shout out to Lucence. Lucence actually came and met me in person. He came to the Wisdom School at the Spokane Library, at the Hilliard Library. Met all of the other members of Wisdom School in person and has been helping out the channel. I cannot thank you guys enough for your willingness to help out in that way. So I genuinely, genuinely appreciate it. We do have a lot to cover. We have a lot to cover. and and we're now in chapter 9. Guys, what are we going to do? What are we going to do when we're finished with Animal Farm besides go deeper into our dystopian journey into 1984 by George Orwell? Yeesh. And guys, look, before we go in, um, I want to let you know this video is not monetized. I turned monetization off so that when we're in the thick of it in this chapter, you guys aren't like interrupted by a commercial. But it does, on the other end, affect my ability to actually generate income from this video. So if you have the ability, send a super chat, just a thanks. It helps out the channel, and we reinvest it in the channel as well. So appreciate that. Um, So, a couple of recaps from the previous chapter. Benjamin is proven right again, right? Uh, Benjamin is proven right. Um, Let me see here. I got to get all my notes together. When isn't Benjamin right? Benjamin kind of knows what's going on. Oh yeah, Benjamin knew what was happening when they were about to blow up the windmill, right? He's like, "Look, they're about to do this. They're about to stuff this thing, and they're going to blow the whole thing up." And so we understood that Benjamin, who's been kind of prophetic throughout this entire journey, knew what was happening. He's seen demolition before. Benjamin, of course, is the donkey. He's been on Animal Farm the longest, and he just hits us with these cryptic messages that you have to interpret. And he says, you know, none of you has ever seen a dead donkey. Donkeys live longer than other animals. And that kind of cryptic message is supposed to be interpreted as something. Um, the only difference um, between Jones and Napoleon at this point is that we have no evidence that Jones was willing to like kill the animals for their sins. So it's getting so crazy at this point. Um, that there really is no real distinction between the tyranny of Napoleon and the tyranny of Jones. Right. As a matter of fact, Napoleon, as we continue, it seems like he's a little bit worse. Um, and of course, they're continuing to change laws. Before we get into chapter 9, in chapter 8, the law about not drinking is now we're not supposed to drink to excess, even though the pig that put that up on the banner drank to excess and therefore fell off the ladder. And so we're seeing the hypocrisy in addition to the restriction of the animal's freedoms. So, are we prepared to go into chapter 9 right now? Chapter 9. Boxer's split hoof was a long time in healing. They had started the rebuilding of the windmill the day after the victory celebrations were ended. Boxer refused to take even a day off work and made it a point of honor not to let it be seen that he was in pain. And guys, I know this is the third time that we've had this discussion, but it bears repeating. The question is Boxer evil? And I love to watch the comments react to this one because it's like sometimes there's subtle shifts. I think for the most part, we think that Boxer is just really naive and that Boxer is not an evil character. Even though he is the mascot, he's looked up to more than any other animal. And does that carry responsibility? Right? Um, I mean, he made it a point of honor not to let anyone see that he is in pain. Because of this, right? Doesn't that just make everyone on the farm a commodity? Right? If you see Boxer working that hard, right? And he's Boxer's just getting after it, right? Even though he has a split hoof, he's in pain. Doesn't that give the tyrants the ability to say, "Hey, look at Boxer. Boxer's doing it. You don't have an excuse. Boxer's up early in the morning. He's up earlier than you and he's got a split hoof. What's your excuse?" Right? So sometimes when those who have power, it's very difficult to see Boxer as less than complicit in what's happening here, And maybe that's a little bit too intense. Jolie said, "Don't confuse evilness with negligence." I think that's a fair point. I do think that's a fair point. Someone else says, "Evil uses naivety." Right. Jennifer says, "He's naively loyal." But he didn't let anyone see he's in pain. In the evenings, he would admit privately to Clover that the hoof troubled him a great deal. Clover treated the hoof with uh, poultices of herbs which she prepared by chewing them, and both she and Benjamin urged Boxer to work less hard. You know what's interesting? That Benjamin is urging Boxer to work less hard. Benjamin rarely speaks up. And it seems like we're at the point now where Benjamin even he's astounded at the work ethic of Boxer at this point. Even Benjamin now, who usually doesn't say anything, he just kind of watches things go by. Even he's looking at Boxer at this point and saying, "Hey, we gotta relax. We gotta draw this back." Right? "A horse's lungs do not last forever," she said to him. But Boxer would not listen. He had, he said, only one real ambition left: to see the windmill well underway before he reached the age of retirement. Guys, let's talk about me. Let's say I said, "Let's talk about me." That sounded like let's close the book and just talk about myself. No, that's not what I don't mean. I don't mean like that. I say, let's say that this channel grew as it's been growing. It's insane, right? With 20,000 subscribers in the course of like a month uploading, a little bit over a month, maybe a month and a half. Let's say that this channel grew to like millions and millions and millions of subscribers. I'm like, there was a whole team behind us and we were just doing books and Is does it become my responsibility to behave ethically? I mean, it's my responsibility anyway. I'm a husband, I'm a father, right? But does does that place responsibility on me automatically? Do I have to like kind of be it's like, okay, there's might be children watching and there might be, you know, people who have been through trauma. Um, I don't know. It just seems like with all of the responsibility that Boxer bears, it's so unfortunate to see him completely put aside his own autonomy for the sake of Napoleon, right? Um, Gigi says yes because you're a renegade now. Absolutely. That's absolutely true. That's fair. At the beginning, it says when the laws of Animal Farm were first formulated, the retiring age had been fixed for horses and pigs at 12, for cows at 14, for dogs at 9, for sheep at 7, and for hens and geese at 5. Liberal old age pensions had been agreed upon. As yet, no animal had actually retired on pension, but of late the subject had been discussed more and more, now that the small field beyond the orchard had been set aside for barley. It was rumored that a corner of the large pasture was to be fenced off and turned into a grazing ground for superannuated animals. Guys, if pension was ever coming, if they ever planned to respect this retirement idea, wouldn't Benjamin already be retired? I mean, Benjamin is the by far the oldest among them, right? But yet they're still believing in the dream of this pension. And it's like a game that they're playing. And by game, I just mean that they're choosing to ignore certain things and choosing to pay attention to certain things. In 1986, there was something called relevance theory. And, a lot of cognitive science still has a lot to do with relevance. How do we do that? How do we determine what to ignore and what to pay attention to? Right? It seems like all of the animals are choosing very poorly what to ignore and what to foreground, right? But anyway, I'm going to read that sentence again. Now that the small field beyond the orchard had been set aside for barley, it was rumored that a quarter of the large pasture was to be fenced off and turned into a grazing ground for superannuated animals. For a horse, it was said, the pension would be 5 pounds of corn a day, and in winter, 15 pounds of hay, with a carrot or possibly an apple on public holidays. Boxer's 12th birthday was due in the late summer of the following year. Meanwhile, life was hard. The winter was as cold as the last one had been, and food was even shorter. Once again, all rations were reduced, except for those of the pigs and the dogs. A too rigid equality of rations, Squealer explained, would have been contrary to the principles of animalism. In any case, he had no difficulty in providing to the other animals, or in proving, sorry, to the other animals that they were not in reality short of food, whatever the appearances might be. So, something to bring up here. George Orwell was an agnostic, probably an agnostic with atheist leanings. And we're going to see him in this chapter unpack the flaws in dogmatic religious belief. And not trusting things that you see, but just being like deeply manipulatable, right? Um, Looks can also be deceiving, obviously, right? So there's a balance that we should draw between empiricism and rationalism, let's say. Um, but I mean, I think we talked a couple chapters ago about plausibility and multi-aptness. We don't just want what's said to us to be multi-apt. We want it to have converging lines of evidence. That's what plausibility is. You remember when the pig said, "Hey, we need all the apples and we need all the milk." That kind of became a slogan in this chat, right? Apples and milk. Throw the apples and milk up, right? Um, but when the Pigs first said, "We need all the apples and milk because of science," right? Science says we need that for our brains so that we can, talk about how to manage the farm. Well, they did have some converging lines of evidence for that idea, but it wasn't multi apt. It only solved one problem and created a lot more, right? And so, I don't know. It's interesting watching kind of the thought patterns of, among the animals here. But he says a too rigid equality of rations would have been contrary to the principles of animalism. In any case, he had no difficulty in proving to the other animals that they were not in reality short of food, whatever the appearance might be. For the time being, certainly, it had been found necessary to make a readjustment of rations. Squealer always spoke of it as a readjustment, never as a reduction. Hmm. Whenever he's going to reduce their food, he calls it a readjustment, not a reduction. Guys, let's play a little game in the chat, right? Instead of innocent people dying, a lot of times we call it collateral damage. It just sounds better, right? Instead of torture, we'll call it enhanced interrogation, right? Don't we do the same thing, right? It's so phenomenal how almost prophetic George Orwell is, right? Because he says, look, instead of calling it a reduction in your food or a reduction in your basic needs, he calls it it's just a readjustment, right? Doesn't that just sound a little bit better than having your food reduced, having your rations reduced, right? So instead of, I wrote some down up here. Instead of innocent people dying overseas, we call it collateral damage. We say, oh, it's just these are the rules of war. It's just collateral damage. Instead of torture, we say enhanced interrogation. Um, I think instead of death, some hospitals say negative patient outcome. Right? Instead of firing people or laying people off, a company will say they're downsizing, right? And so it's very, it's important to recognize what's actually being said, because oftentimes people in power will want to soften the truth, so that we can just kind of let things go, right? And don't get too up in arms about it. So Squealer always spoke of it as a readjustment. I'm sorry, Brenda said company restructuring. Yeah. Police brutality is often called enforcement. For sure. Words are powerful. Absolutely. The language gives away the true meaning. Kim, thanks for that. For sure. Um, but in comparison with the days of Jones, the improvement was enormous. Reading out the figures in a shrill, rapid voice, he proved to them in detail that they had more oats, more hay, more turnips than they had had in Jones's day, that they worked shorter hours, that their drinking water was of better quality, that they lived longer, that a larger portion of their young ones survived infancy, and that they had more straw in their stalls and suffered less from fleas. Guys, we talked before about Stockholm syndrome. Another word for Stockholm syndrome is capture bonding. It's when you're so deeply traumatized by your situation that your brain kind of fails to countenance the urgency of leaving that situation. And you almost become like in love with your captor. You start to look up to them in this strange way. Because there's a mixture of fear. And then, when that person who you deeply fear, gives you a grace, like an apple or a granola bar or whatever it is, you see that as just this big gift. There's a book which I'm going to recommend it, guys. There's a book called Pimp by Iceberg Slim, and this is one of the most brutal books. So I mean, if you can't stomach it, then respectfully, right? But Iceberg Slim wrote this book from prison, and he was talking about like being a pimp and how the mental manipulation through things like trauma, poor education, exhaustion. And look, This is exactly what these animals are going through too. And I wanted to pause here for a second and just let you guys know that this is an excellent time. The it's an excellent time to invest in human beings, right? If you can, right? When you check on someone, check on them in terms of their nutrition. Be like, hey, what did you have to eat today? Or it's like, oh, are you, because malnutrition can put you in a cognitively limited state to where you're more vulnerable. You're more of a commodity. When you check on people, figure out what they're learning. Like, hey, what have you learned this week? What's new this week? People say, what's new? They're like, how are you thriving? Are you growing? Are you blossoming? These are questions that we want to ask one another, right? We want to get in the habit of asking each other, what's the newest thing you learned? Like, teach me something that you learned this week. Because if someone is stagnant with respect to what they know, or if they're caught in an echo chamber, they're more likely to be victimized by things like what we're reading, right? Um, Another thing is exhaustion, right? How well are you sleeping? Right? Is because these animals, I think the reason it's so easy to trick them is because they're traumatized, malnourished, poorly educated, and exhausted, which is just a nasty recipe for all kinds of cognitive limitation and manipulation. So when we check on each other, as we should. And I think I'll even, I may, throw that in the Discord just as a fun prompt, right? Um, you know, when we check on one another, just be checking for trauma, malnutrition, education. And by education, I just mean blossoming growth, learning new things. This entire channel is dedicated to keeping you in that growth state and keeping me in that growth state through my correspondence with you. So I just wanted to put that there. They knew that life nowadays was harsh and bare, that they were often hungry and often cold, and that they were usually working when they were not asleep. But doubtless it had been worse in the old days. Doubtless it had been worse in the old days. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Phantom, thank you for saying that. Okay, Phantom, you just volunteered yourself, by the way, because I had forgotten. Phantom sent me a message in Discord asking me, is like, hey bro, should you be up right now? Should you even be up at this hour? And the reason that I loved and respected that is because he's like, hey bro, we're doing some important work together. It's very important to check on you in terms of are you so I just thought that was dope. I love being checked on in that way. He's like, hey man, like, what are you learning? What are the new things that you learned? You know has anything difficult happened recently that you need to talk to someone about? So we have merch coming out that says like, I'm cognitively available. It's something funny we say on this channel. It's like, but it's like, I'm offering myself to kind of be a receptacle for what you need to get off your chest. So Phantom, shout out to you. Shout out to you for that. But they say doubtless it had been worse in the old days, and we are also susceptible to that. And I'm going to stop pausing, every couple of seconds. But chapter 9 is very, very dense. It has a lot of good things to unpack in here. So bear with me if you don't mind. Uh, they're saying, look, we're cold, we're hungry, we're traumatized, we're malnourished, we're poorly educated, we are exhausted. But doubtless it was worse when Jones was here. Of course it was. It had to be, right? Don't we do the same thing? It's so, even though it's the past, it's like the past has repeated itself. We say, "Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, it's bad now, but at least it's not like it's in the 50s. It's not like the 60s. It was a lot worse in the, you know, 1800s. You go back to a time period where it was worse, and that kind of justifies the way things are." I love the lines he puts in here. To continue, he says, "They were glad to believe so. Besides, in those days, they had been slaves, and now they were free. And that made all the difference," as Squealer did not fail to point out. There were many more mouths to feed now. In the autumn, the 4 sows had all littered about simultaneously, producing 31 young pigs between them. the young pigs were piebald, and as Napoleon was the only boar on the farm, it was possible to guess at their parentage. It was announced it was announced that later, when bricks and timber had been purchased, a schoolroom would be built in the farmhouse garden. For the time being, the young pigs were given their instruction by Napoleon himself. Now, why? Why would the animals entrust more children to Napoleon, being that the last time he took the puppies, he raised them as kind of this military unit that only serves himself? Why would they put themselves in that same position again? I'm going to repeat it: trauma, malnourished, sleepless, overworked, right? Those are kind of the four things that are going on with these animals that make them a complete commodity and completely susceptible to this abuse. Um, they took their exercise in the garden. So it says, for the time being, the young pigs were given their instruction by Napoleon himself. In the farmhouse kitchen, they took their exercise in the garden and were discouraged from playing with the other young animals. About this time, too, it was laid down as a rule that when a pig and any other animal met on the path, the other animal must stand aside, and also that all pigs of whatever degree were to have the privilege of wearing green ribbons on their tails on Sundays. Hmm. So the pigs are being seen as, uh, on the top of some kind of, dominance hierarchy. Dia says, yeah, another human thing, right? We set up these hierarchies almost as a matter of course. I completely agree. But isn't it interesting that now that Napoleon has taken on this godlike complex, you remember the song and the poems that are being written about Napoleon that used like the old English, the thys and thous, and how great you are, father of all the animals. How he hides in the farmhouse and never comes out, so that he's like a spiritual entity. He's taken on a god complex, right? And since this is a being allowed, right? What's next with someone who thinks that they're God other than to worship their own image, right? So the pigs are being put in this, the top of this hierarchy because remind Napoleon of himself. It's like, oh yeah, they're like me. It's not about the animals anymore. It's about anything which is, you know, the trickle down effect comes from Napoleon to those who are most like him. And now they are wearing green ribbons on their tails. Karen Jones brings up something really interesting: ribbons for pigs, but not for Molly. Remember, all Molly wanted was those ribbons, right? That's a very, very good point. The farm had had a fairly successful year, but was still short of money. There were the bricks, sand, and lime for the schoolroom to be purchased, and it would also be necessary to begin saving up again for the machinery for the windmill. Then there were lamp oil and candles for the house, sugar for Napoleon's own table. He forbade this to the other pigs, on the ground that it made them fat, and all the usual replacements such as tools, nails, string, coal, wire, scrap iron, and dog biscuits. So this is he gets a bunch of like military grade stuff and building equipment, and the only food that he gets is for the dogs. A stump of hay and part of the potato crop were sold off, and the contract for eggs was increased to 600 a week, so that there, so that the, so that that year the hens barely hatched enough chicks to keep their numbers at the same level. Rations reduced in December were reduced again in February, and lanterns in the stalls were forbidden to save oil. But the pigs seemed comfortable enough, and in fact were putting on weight. If anything, one afternoon in late February, a warm, rich, appetizing scent, such as the animals had never smelt before, wafted itself across the yard from the little brew house, which had been disused in Jones's time, and which stood beyond the kitchen. Someone said it was the smell of cooking barley. The animals sniffed the air hungrily and wondered whether a warm mash was being prepared for their supper. But no warm mash appeared. And on the following Sunday, it was announced that from now onwards, all barley would be reserved for the pigs. The field beyond the orchard had already been sown with barley, and the news soon leaked out that every pig was now receiving a ration of a pint of beer daily, with half a gallon for Napoleon himself, which was always served to him in the Crown Derby soup tureen. You know, what's interesting is that, this has happened a couple of times across history. I think one of the most famous, the Marie Antoinette line, "Let them eat cake." When you see yourself as a god or goddess, you may find yourself disturbed at the fact that other people are actually suffering, right? Uh, you might hate the fact that they think this is your fault or that they think they're not being treated well enough because everything is right according to you. That's one of the scary things about, this style of narcissism. It's like he's really in a world where everything is right as long as he thinks it. And so when he sees suffering at all, he's just disgusted by it. Like, why is that happening? It's a really disturbing thing. But we continue. If there were hardships to be borne, they were partly offset by the fact that life nowadays had a greater dignity than it had had before. And notice that the narrator is untrustworthy. This is a intentional act by George Orwell. He wants you to really think about this. Listen to this. But if there were hardships to be borne, they were partly offset by the fact that life nowadays had a greater dignity than it had had before, right? Of course, that's not true, but the narrator, right? So George Orwell has made himself an untrustworthy narrator, almost like the narrator himself is in allegiance with the pigs, right? And of course, I, as the narrator, have put myself in allegiance with the pigs. Hence, everyone has to give me apples and milk as soon as they enter the chat. We've had a lot of fun, um, but it's clearly not true that they have a greater dignity now than they've ever had, right? But when you sacrifice autonomy, then you have whatever the tyrant says you have, right? If you're willing to sacrifice your autonomy for the sake of that tyranny, then whatever the tyrant says you have is what you have, right? It's like I said before. Uh, Yeonmi Park, she escaped North Korea, and she said, "Look, there are no words for friend in North Korea. The word is comrade in North Korea, right? There's no word for depression because no one can be depressed in the communist utopia. They just get rid of the word. The word is meaningless there." So they don't know that they're depressed. They don't know that they're starving. They know that they have some feeling, which would be eradicated if they were to be food. But guys, be very, very careful when people want to render words meaningless and just implant meanings. Like, oh, this is exactly what happened, and this is the new meaning. A lot of historical revisionism has happened in this book. To continue, it says there were more songs, more speeches, more processions. Napoleon had commanded that once a week there should be held something called a spontaneous demonstration, the object of which was to celebrate the struggles and triumphs of Animal Farm. At the appointed time, the animals would leave their work and march round the precincts of the farm in military formation, with the pigs leading, then the horses, then the cows, then the sheep, and then the poultry. Guys, this is very reminiscent of what Stalin did as well. Joseph Stalin would have military parades in the Red Square to forget the starvation. As he knew that people were starving, and he's like, "Oh, I don't want to be a leader of a starving group. I want to be honored. And so instead of giving them food, I'm going to make them march. I'm going to make them do this big parade." Um, and that I think is what the spontaneous demonstration, right? It's like I just want a spontaneous demonstration of how great I am. The dogs flanked the procession, and at the head of all marched Napoleon's black cockerel. Boxer and Clover always carried between them a green banner marked with the hoof and the horn and the caption, "Long live Comrade Napoleon." So, to hell with "Long live Animal Farm," right? Once again, once you reach this point of tyranny, they can just come right out and say it. It's all about Napoleon now. So, "Long live Comrade Napoleon" is the banner, which makes them all kind of seem expendable. Afterwards, there were recitations of poems composed in Napoleon's honor, and a speech by Squealer giving particulars of the latest increases in the production of foodstuffs. And on occasion, a shot was fired from the gun. The sheep were the greatest devotees of the spontaneous demonstration, and if anyone complained, as a few animals sometimes did, when no pigs or dogs were near, that they wasted that they wasted time and meant a lot of standing about in the cold. The sheep were sure to silence him with a tremendous bleating of four legs good, two legs bad. But by and large, the animals enjoyed these celebrations. They found it comforting to be reminded that, after all, they were truly their own masters, and that the work they did was for their own benefit. Guys, if the animals in this situation are their own masters, what does the word master mean? What does the word master mean if these animals under these conditions are their own masters? You see how it's just fluff? It's nothing. It's completely meaningless. So make sure that the words that you use are actually attached to something. And that's something that we're kind of losing track of too. So that, we continue, what with the songs, the processions, Squealer's list of figures, the thunder of the gun, the crowing of the cockerel, and the fluttering of the flag, they were able to forget that their bellies were empty, at least part of the time. In April, Animal Farm was proclaimed a republic, and it became necessary to elect a president. There was only one candidate, Napoleon, who was elected unanimously. On the same day, it was given out that fresh documents had been discovered which revealed further details about Snowball's complicity with Jones. It now appeared that Snowball had not, as the animals had previously imagined, merely attempted to lose the battle of the cowshed by means of a stratagem, but had been openly fighting on Jones's side. In fact, it was he who had actually been the leader of the human forces and had charged into battle with the words "Long live humanity" on his lips. The wounds on Snowball's back, which a few of the animals still remember to have seen, had been inflicted by Napoleon's teeth. Guys, this level of revisionism, right? Do we remember the four things? The four things that we should check on each other, right? Malnourishment, sleeplessness, um, being overworked, and poorly educated. So it's not that somebody has to have a college degree. That's not what I mean by educated. I mean, are you someone whose wisdom consists in the knowledge that you know nothing, who's always chasing insights and epiphanies, right? Someone who's willing to give up a bad idea for a good idea, who pays open, curious attention to whoever they're talking to, which is not to say that you're going to buy, somebody's bullshit. You know what I mean? But approaching your holy opponent with open, curious attention, right? Or do you live in an echo chamber, right? Um, I think that's what I mean by educated, continually opening up, a continual blossoming of your knowledge, right? Um, and then malnourishment, right? Make sure you're eating the right things, putting the right things in your body so you're not constantly exhausted and constantly, you know. Um, and then the news is just like a 24/7 trauma machine, right? Ever since the algorithm was told to increase user engagement, the news has been nothing but traumatizing stuff almost continually. So these things are really it's good to take these things off autopilot and have the conversation sometimes. In the middle of the summer, Moses the raven suddenly reappeared on the farm. After an absence of several years, he was quite unchanged, still did no work, and talked in the same strain as ever about Sugar Candy Mountain. He would perch on a stump, flap his black wings, and talk by the hour to anyone who would listen. "Up there, comrades," he would say solemnly, pointing to the sky with his large beak, "up there, just on the other side of that dark cloud that you can see, there it lies, Sugar Candy Mountain, that happy country where we poor animals shall rest forever from our labors." So he's unchanged after years. Of course, this represents religion, right? And this is kind of how George Orwell feels about religion. Once again, I don't think Orwell was an atheist, but I think he was an agnostic for sure. But he leaned in the atheist direction. And this is kind of his insight into how he feels about religion, and that religion can just it can be used for good, obviously. It can be used for evil, obviously. So religion itself, it's not a leader by itself, right? Um, because I mean, with this sugar candy mountain thing, I mean, think about this. If people were truly doomed, would you give them a fake story to believe in if it helped? I mean, is pie in the sky when you die all bad? Does it pacify the tendency to have a revolution? Right? Does it make there's a lot of interesting questions to ask about this bird. But what's more fascinating is the response. Check this out. He even claimed to have been there on one of his higher flights and to have seen the everlasting fields of clover and the linseed cake and lump sugar growing on the hedges. Many of the animals believed him. Their lives now, they reasoned, were hungry and laborious. Was it not right and just? Was it not right and just that a better world should exist somewhere else? A thing that was difficult to determine was the attitude of the pigs toward Moses. They all declared contemptuously that his stories about Sugar Candy Mountain were lies, and yet they allowed him to remain on the farm, not working, with an allowance of a gill of beer a day. So giving him beer is promoting his presence. They find this religious myth useful. The pigs find it useful. So long as he doesn't start to say that that tyrants can't get to Sugar Candy Mountain. As long as as long as all of the authority goes to Napoleon, then yeah, they're saying yeah, we're willing to keep that religious component. So I wrote there in the margins, they considered religion useful so long as it served them. After his hoof had healed up, Boxer worked harder than ever. Indeed, all the animals worked like slaves that year, apart from the regular work of the farm and the rebuilding of the windmill. There was the schoolhouse for the young pigs, which was started in March. Sometimes the long hours on insufficient food were hard to bear, but Boxer never faltered. That's always going to bug me because if Boxer never falters, then no one has an excuse. In nothing that he said or did was there any sign that his strength was not what it had been. It was only his appearance that was a little altered. His hide was less shiny than it used to be, and his great haunches seemed to have shrunken. Now, check this out. This is important. This is an important line. The other said, Boxer will pick up when the spring grasses come on. I know that it doesn't seem like that's the most important line of the chapter. To me, that one stands out. Like in chapter 5, I have it written in the back of this book. In chapter 5, the most important line to me was Napoleon had been against the windmill all along. In chapter 7, I think the best line was when Boxer said, I don't believe that. When he actually decided to say, I don't believe you, that was powerful. It was a moment he could have turned everything around. In chapter 8, um, it was as though the windmill had never been, right? When it blew up, it was as though the windmill had never been, with all the windmill represents. But in chapter 9, I think the most important sentence in this chapter is when the others said, Boxer will pick up when the spring grasses come. Guys, they learned this from him, right? You remember when they used to say to Boxer, hey, stop straining so hard. Hey, take care of yourself. Hey, like, but he's ignoring them. For chapter over chapter and chapter and chapter and chapter, it says Boxer ignored them and said, I will work harder. Napoleon is always right. I will work harder. Napoleon is always right. So whenever anyone tells him you need to rest, you're going to exhaust yourself, he completely ignores them. And so now they're saying, right, when they're seeing that he's physically weak, when they're seeing that his haunches seem to have shrunken, now they're saying Boxer will pick up when the spring grasses come on. Oh, he'll don't worry, he's fine. He'll get back to it. They've learned this from him. So now they're less compassionate than they were before. And then it's like, oh yeah, he's fine. He'll be, you know, interesting. And that'll affect the story, as we'll see shortly. But the spring came, and Boxer grew no fatter. Sometimes on the slope leading to the top of the quarry, when he braced his muscles against the weight of some vast boulder, it seemed that nothing kept him on his feet except for the will to continue. At such times, his lips were seen to form the words, I will work harder, but he had no voice left. Once again, Clover and Benjamin warned him to take care of his health, but Boxer paid no attention. His 12th birthday was approaching. He did not care what happened so long as a good store of stone was accumulated before he went on pension. Late one evening in the summer, a sudden rumor ran round the farm that something had happened to Boxer. He had gone out alone to drag a load of stone down to the windmill. And sure enough, the rumor was true. A few minutes later, two pigeons came racing in with the news. Boxer has fallen. He is lying on his side and can't get up. About half of the animals on the farm rushed out to the knoll where the windmill stood. And there lay Boxer, between the shafts of the cart, his neck stretched out, unable even to raise his head. His eyes were glazed, his sides matted with sweat. A thin stream of blood had trickled out of his mouth. Clover dropped to her knees at his side. Boxer, she cried, how are you? It's my lung, said Boxer in a weak voice. It does not matter. I think you'll be able to finish the windmill without me. There is a pretty good store of stone accumulated. I had only another month to go in any case. To tell you the truth, I had been looking forward to my retirement, and perhaps as Benjamin is growing old too, they will let him retire at the same time and be a companion to me. Guys, Boxer has no identity apart from the mission. He's sacrificed it. He has absolutely no identity apart from the mission. Um, there's something I want to say, but we'll get to it here shortly. We must get help at once, said Clover. Run, somebody, and tell Squealer what has happened. All the other animals immediately raced back to the farmhouse to give Squealer the news. Only Clover remained. and Benjamin, who laid down at Boxer's side, and without speaking, kept the flies off him with his long tail. After about a quarter of an hour, Squealer appeared, full of sympathy and concern. He said that Comrade Napoleon had learned with the very deepest distress of this misfortune to one of the most loyal workers on the farm, and was already making arrangements to send Boxer to be treated in the hospital at Willingdon. The animals felt a little uneasy at this, except for Molly and Snowball. No other animal had ever left the farm, and they did not like to think of their sick comrade in the hands of human beings. However, Squealer easily convinced them that the veterinary surgeon in Willingdon could treat Boxer's case more satisfactorily than could be done on the farm. And about half an hour later, when Boxer had somewhat recovered, it was with difficulty that he got onto his feet and managed to limp back to his stall, where Clover and Benjamin had prepared a good bed of straw for him. For the next 2 days, Boxer remained in his stall. The pigs had sent out a large bottle of pink medicine, which they had found in the medicine chest in the bathroom, and Clover administered it to Boxer twice a day after meals. In the evenings, she lay in his stall and talked to him, while Benjamin kept the flies off him. Boxer professed not to be sorry for what had happened. If he made a good recovery, he might expect to live another 3 years, and he looked forward to the peaceful days that he would spend in the corner of the big pasture. It would be the first time that he had had leisure to study and improve his mind. He intended, he said, to devote the rest of his life to learning the remaining 22 letters of the alphabet. Zero personal identity. He intended to devote the rest of his life to learning the remaining 22 letters of the alphabet. However, Benjamin and Clover could only be with Boxer after working hours, and it was in the middle of the day when the van came to take him away. The animals were all at work weeding turnips under the supervision of a pig, when they were astonished to see Benjamin come galloping from the direction of the farm buildings, braying at the top of his voice. It was the first time that they had ever seen Benjamin excited. Indeed, it was the first time that anyone had ever seen him gallop. "Quick, quick," he shouted, "come at once. They're taking Boxer away." Without waiting for orders from the pig, the animals broke off work and raced back to the farm buildings. Sure enough, there in the yard was a large closed van, drawn by two horses, with lettering on its side and a sly looking man in a low crowned bowler hat sitting in the driver's seat. And Boxer's stall was empty. The animals crowded round the van. "Goodbye, Boxer," they chorused. "Goodbye." "Fools! Fools!" shouted Benjamin, prancing round them and stamping the earth with his small hooves. "Fools! Do you not see what is written on the side of the van?" I want to come back to this. Fools! Do you not see what is written on the side of the van? Emily says, finally, Benjamin saying something. Guys, as Benjamin is freaking out, calling these animals fools, and he says, "Do you not see what's written on the side of the van?" It's important to remember that this book is such a cohesive book. Everything blends. When he says, "Do you not see what was written on the side of the van?" Wasn't it just a couple of chapters ago they were trying to get Benjamin to help them to read? He didn't do it, right? This book is all about consequences. What if you would have made this different choice here? Like, what if the animals would have revolted back when Napoleon took the puppies? Wouldn't things have gone differently? Right? And because they made the wrong decision, now the hens have to give up all their eggs because they didn't speak up. So now, when Benjamin is finally distraught and finally deciding to speak, why is he surprised that none of the animals know how to read? He never taught them, and he had the opportunity. That gave the animals pause, and there was a hush. Muriel began to spell out the words, but Benjamin pushed her aside, and in the midst of a deadly silence, he read. Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler. Willingdon, dealer in hides and bone meal. Kennels supplied. Bro, I wouldn't even have that on the side of my truck. That's a crazy thing to have on the side of your truck. Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler. Willingdon, dealer in hides and bone meal. Kennels supplied. Bro, that's worse. That's the worst kind of thing on the side of your truck. If I ever have a van, I want to just put that on the side of my van just so people look at me like I'm crazy. Um, they are taking Boxer. Do you not understand what that means? This is Benjamin speaking. He says, they are taking Boxer to the knackers. A cry of horror burst from all the animals. At this moment, the man on the box whipped up his horses and the van moved out of the yard at a smart trot. All the animals followed, crying out at the top of their voices. Clover forced her way to the front. The van began to gather speed. Clover tried to stir her. Sorry, the van began to gather speed. Clover tried to stir her stout limbs to a gallop and achieve a canter. Boxer, she cried, Boxer, Boxer, Boxer. And just at this moment, as though he had heard the uproar outside, Boxer's face with the white stripe down his nose appeared at the small window at the back of the van. Guys, give me just 1 second here. Okay. Boxer, cried Clover in a terrible voice. Boxer, get out quickly. They're taking you to your death. All the animals took up the cry of get out, Boxer, get out. But the van was already gathering speed and drawing away from them. It was uncertain whether Boxer had understood what Clover had said. But a moment later, his face disappeared from the window, and there was the sound of a tremendous drumming of hooves inside the van. So his hooves are drumming on the van now. He's trying to get out. And remember what we said about Benjamin? How it's too late now? It's like, yeah, and like now you wish all the animals knew how to read so that you wouldn't have to explain things to them but now it's too late, right? Listen to this. This is definitely one of the saddest parts of this chapter. This might actually be the line of the chapter. Listen. He was trying to kick his way out. And listen to this line. The time had been when a few kicks from Boxer's hooves would have smashed the van to matchwood. But alas, his strength had left him. Guys, this whole book is about don't wait until it's too late. He doesn't have strength anymore. Now that he needs it, now that he's on in the back of this van being driven to the knackers, he's expended all his strength. He gave that to Napoleon. So now it's not there for him when he needs it. You see that? Wow. The time had been when a smashed the van to matchwood, but alas, his strength had left him. And in a few moments, the sound of drumming hooves grew fainter and died away. In desperation, the animals began appealing to the two horses, which drew the van to stop. Comrades, comrades, they shouted, don't take your own brother to his death. But the stupid brutes, too ignorant to realize what was happening, merely set back their ears and quickened their pace. Boxer's face did not reappear in the window. Too late, someone thought of racing ahead and shutting the five-barred gate. But in another moment, the van was through the fan was through it and rapidly disappearing down the road. Boxer was never seen again. Guys, if you have any questions, as a matter of fact, we'll get to questions right at the end. We only have one more page, but drop super chats. We'll get to all of those questions afterwards, and I will correspond with the rest of you here in a second. 3 days later, it was announced that he had died in the hospital at Willingdon. In spite of receiving every attention a horse could have, Squealer came to announce the news to the others. He had, he said, been present during Boxer's last hours. It was the most affecting sight I have ever seen, said Squealer, lifting his trotter and wiping away a tear. Man, Squealer is something with the propaganda, right? Like he can cry on command. He's an actor, right? It was the most affecting sight I've ever seen, said Squealer, lifting his trotter and wiping away a tear. I was at his bedside, at the very last, and at the end, almost too weak to speak, he whispered in my ear that his soul's sorrow was to have passed on before the windmill was finished. Forward, comrades, he whispered. Forward in the name of the rebellion. Long live Animal Farm. Long live Comrade Napoleon. Napoleon is always right. Those were his very last words, comrade. You know what's so sad about this? The irony. It gives me chills, right? The irony at this part. Listen to the lie that Squealer is telling. What's sad about the lie is that it's almost true. Squealer says, he whispered in my ear, comrades, that his soul's sorrow was to have passed on before the windmill was finished. What's sad about that is that if Boxer were still alive, in his own almost, we were very, very close. But of course, Snowball has to sabotage us. We were very, very close. Thanks, guys. I appreciate your patience. We will get the internet thing figured out. Don't worry. Okay, but it wouldn't be the Animal Farm live. You know, it wouldn't be quite the Animal Farm live if we didn't. You know, if Snowball didn't try to throw something in there. So, where were we? 3 days later, it was announced that he had died in the hospital at Willingdon. In spite of receiving every attention a horse could have, Squealer came to announce the news to the others. Okay, so we had long live Comrade Napoleon. Napoleon is always right. Those were his very last words, comrade. Here, Squealer's demeanor suddenly changed. He fell silent for a moment, and his little eyes darted suspicious glances from side to side before he proceeded. It had come to his knowledge, he said, that a foolish and wicked rumor had been circulated at the time of Boxer's removal. Some of the animals had noticed that the van which took Boxer away was marked Horse Slaughterer and had actually jumped to the conclusion that Boxer was being sent to the knackers. Isn't it funny that believing exactly what your eyes see can be interpreted as wicked and foolish? Guys, this is happening in our day and age too. Believing what your eyes see is called wicked and foolish. He says it had come to his knowledge, he said, that a foolish and wicked rumor had been circulated. At the time of Boxer's removal, some of the animals had noticed that the van which took Boxer away was marked Horse Slaughterer and had actually jumped to the conclusion. It's funny, this is called jumping to a conclusion, reading something and assuming that what you read is It was almost unbelievable, said Squealer, that any animal could be so stupid. Surely, he cried indignantly, whisking his tail and skipping from side to side. Surely they knew their beloved leader, Comrade Napoleon, better than that. But the explanation was really very simple. The van had previously been the property of the knacker and had been bought by the veterinary surgeon, who had not yet painted the old name out. That was how the mistake had arisen. The animals were enormously relieved to hear this. And when Squealer went on to give further graphic details of Boxer's deathbed, the admirable care he had received, and the expensive medicines for which Napoleon had paid without a thought as to the cost, their last doubts disappeared, and the sorrow that they felt for their comrade's death was tempered by the thought that at least he had died happy. Mm. They watched their friend get worked to death, right? And the degree to which they themselves are traumatized, sleepless, malnourished, and uneducated, even that can just be brushed over. And so we don't imagine that today. We don't, none of us imagine today that we could watch our brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, and children, for those of us who are old enough to have children, we don't immediately imagine that we're capable of like watching those people, be beaten to death or worked to death or slaughtered in front of us for their sins. We don't imagine that we could live in that reality. But guys, the brain is very, very fragile, and the mind, I should say, is very fragile. Trauma, sleeplessness, malnourishment, and poor education. Um, which is kind of one of the reasons I'm so grateful to be a recipient of your open and curious attention. It means a lot because it helps me grow at the same time. It's like I'm reading books, you're reading books, we're understanding these things together, we're diving deep. We're going to keep doing it. Um, Napoleon himself appeared at the meeting on the following Sunday morning and pronounced a short oration in Boxer's honor. It had not been possible, he said, to bring back their lamented comrade's remains for interment on the farm, but he had ordered a large wreath to be made from the laurels in the farmhouse garden and sent down to be placed on Boxer's grave. And in a few days' time, the pigs intended to hold a memorial banquet in Boxer's honor. Napoleon ended his speech with a reminder of Boxer's two favorite maxims: I will work harder, and Comrade Napoleon is always right. So listen to this. Listen to this. Napoleon ended his speech with a reminder of Boxer's two favorite maxims. Remember, Napoleon loves to use death. If someone's died, he's like, he'll use that against you emotionally. He says, look, remember what Boxer always said: I will work harder, and Napoleon is always right. Maxims, he said, which every animal would do well to adopt as his own. Didn't you know it was coming? Right? He wants everyone to be a little version of Boxer. And guys, whether we hate it or love it, that's kind of Boxer's legacy. That's the legacy he left behind. It's not enough to be a hard worker if what you're working for is the development of a tyrant, you know? Um, it's unfortunate, but I think that's Boxer's legacy. On the day appointed for the banquet, a grocer's van drove up from Willington and delivered a large wooden crate at the farmhouse. That night there was the sound of uproarious singing, which was followed by what sounded like a violent quarrel and ended at about 11 o'clock with a tremendous crash of glass. No one stirred in the farmhouse before noon on the following day, and the word went round that from somewhere or other, the pigs had acquired the money to buy themselves another case of whiskey. You guys think it's possible that they sold Boxer for whiskey? That's what Boxer was used for, his remains? Yeah. I will work harder, and Napoleon is always right. Guys, that is chapter 9. What are our thoughts? Are there any questions? apples and milk, and now whiskey. Gigi, I love you, man. That was a rough one for sure. Definitely a hard chapter. Absolutely a hard chapter. Emily said, "Can we read something uplifting to balance this?" Right. What can we read uplifting to balance this? Look, a book that I eventually want to get into is Gödel Escher Bach by Douglas Hofstadter. Um, and you can see where my bookmark is. I'm just at the very, very beginning, but it's extremely, extremely uplifting, at least for me. Um, it's, I wonder if George Orwell had, um, I don't know, I wonder if George Orwell had any idea how prophetic this book would be, or if he was just talking about a time period, right? It's very, very strange. Somebody said, "How does Boxer's death relate to Stalin?" I think Boxer represents the working class who had bought into Stalin's propaganda. And a lot of the working class were bought in. When Stalin died, there were tears. There was trauma, but the people loved Stalin, and I'm not going to say that it was all Stockholm syndrome, that it was all capture bonding. I mean, look, when your posters and statues are everywhere, there's a mixture of dread and honor and fear and love, all kinds of wild emotions, and I think that Boxer represents that group. Um, as I'm gonna check out the super chats right now. Phantom, love you, man. He said, "Who said Benjamin?" Phantom, I'm gonna be looking at it if you wanted to clarify that. Um, Nikki says, "Thank you for the amazing gift of the book club." Thank you too. Thank you for joining me. Um, thank you for the open and curious attention, and we will continue doing the book club. Ruffs, thank you so much for your $3 super chat. Jennifer Baldwin, thank you for the $4.99 super chat. And Kat put $5 toward Boxers Memorial Fund. $5 toward Boxers Memorial Fund. And if Boxer was a human in the court of law, would he be guilty of a crime? That's a fascinating question. Would Boxer be guilty of a crime in a court of law? I mean, it depends on the court. He certainly wouldn't be guilty in Napoleon's court. It depends on how just the court is. I mean, there are a lot of people would love someone like Boxer. Corporations love uh, workaholics. You know, welcome to the Insight members. Definitely grab a membership if you can. Um, anything that you can do to help the channel. Listen, guys, Rin chapter 8, chapter 7. Yeah, chapter 7 is going to be dropping tonight. So thanks for everybody who's been on top of me on that. Not only is Rin's chapter 7 going to be dropping tonight, but it is also going to have the available merch attached. And some of that merch is Animal Farm Book Club merch, which is just going to kind of include some of the slogans that we've developed here as inside jokes. It's going to be a lot of fun. So please grab something, support the channel. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. And Rin really was the biggest inspiration for this channel. I would say it's like Rin first, and then Black Pegasus. If you guys don't know who Black Pegasus is, you should definitely go check out his channel. Some of the best reviews online some of the best reactions. He's amazing. He's like he has like 500,000 subscribers. He just does amazing stuff, and he's been a friend of mine for like 10 years. And so he had me go over his house and react to some stuff, and I would just sit next to him and I'd do the reactions. And he'd call me. He's like, "Hey, man, there's some people that would I think would probably subscribe to your channel if you got into this." And I was like, no, I'm not going to do anything like that. I don't know anything about the interwebs. As young as I look, I'm old. I needed so many people to help me with Discord, uh, and so then I saw Ren had actually posted on his Instagram a reaction that me and Black Pegasus did, and had like 15 million views on it. And so that was like, okay, well, that's interesting. People at work started to bring up their phones to me and say, "Hey, is this you? Are you this guy?" And it's like, okay, well, maybe it might be a time to kind of just put some things out there. One thing that I had no clue would happen. I had absolutely no clue that that there would be this. I had no clue that you guys would actually be nerds like myself. That is fascinating. I guess, you could find anything you want online, even an amazing group. So I'm just more than blessed and honored, and I'm extremely happy with the book club portion of this thing. And no, if anybody has any questions for me, anything, tag me like Gigi just did. He says, "Mr. Biscuit, you remember day 17, Ren, new song, Vincent's Tale." Yeah, for sure. Wait a second. Wait a second. Is Vincent's Tale new? Book club has been stupendous. Vincent's Tale is new, and he dropped it. Oh, it's dropping on the 17th. You guys want to watch that live? That would be crazy. Hold on a second. It's dropping on Thursday. That would be crazy lit if you guys would be up for that. There will be 3 parts. Man, Ren is such a genius, dude. I love that there's 3 parts to this. He's getting together all his people. We might see the pig mask again. Might see Napoleon. He's dropping more music soon. Man, there's so much stuff. Before I was on this live, I was actually on the phone with Black Pegasus, and man, the stuff that's coming up, it's really insane. A tale inspired from Vincent van Gogh. No way. Guys, um when should I drop Ren chapter 7? I think I'm going to drop it in like 2 hours. I've got to let this live breathe for just a little while. I have to let it breathe because the algorithm will smite me if I don't. Dia says now, please, so I can sleep. I love you guys. You guys are legit. Hey, let's link over in Discord. Now, look, Discord, I'm not as familiar with as I am familiar with what is it, Clubhouse. Do you guys like texting more than you do talking? Like, I want to push a button and talk into a mic. Are you guys kind of a little back and forth on that? Discord still scares me. That's what Karen says. Put up the Discord link. Yes, I will definitely put up the Discord link. I am going to drop the Discord link. Okay, let's see. Oh, shoot. That's not it. Wait a second. Here is the Discord link. Hopefully you get it right there. There's the Discord link. Boop. And now it's pinned to the top. And guys, I have no way to thank um, Joanne and Lucence. It's really their it's really their fault that the Discord rollout is going well at all. Any of the good things that you see on Discord, any of your ability like to communicate, all of that is Joanne and Lucence, and they're helping me and they're offering to help with that. All of the negative effects, it's all Snowball, guys. It's not me. Don't blame me. Okay, it's Snowball's fault if anything goes wrong at all, ever. I love that I have that scapegoat. Yes, Mel, good question. When will the next chapter be? The next chapter will be this week, either on Friday or before Friday, and it will be announced tomorrow. This much I can guarantee. Does my copy have the prefaces? You mean my copy of Animal Farm? Please don't forget to hit like. Yeah, please hit the like button on this video before you go. Hit like, hit share, subscribe, get yourself a membership, all the good stuff. Hey, Biscuit, you can have voice chat channels in your Discord. Then you can get the best of both worlds. Yeah, but will you guys join me in the voice chat thing? I want to kind of set up a whole voice chat where there's a stage where I can really talk to people. But a lot of people, you want to just kind of keep it, just the text thing. I don't text very often, and my fingers are fat and huge. So texting takes me a very long time. I need a phone that looks like a computer keyboard. Will we be doing a final session with the conclusion in chapter 10? Will we be doing a final session with the conclusion? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. We'll be doing chapter 10 this week, and that is the end of the book. But and it's I think it's a relatively short chapter. And guys, it's been so long since I read Animal Farm that I genuinely have no idea what happens. I genuinely have no idea what happens in chapter 10. It's been so long since I read it, and I didn't read in advance. Like, I still haven't read chapter 10 for the live. Let's see. Just drop the link to Discord again. Bunker said voice channels can get hectic the more people are in them. That's true. The book has an afterword. Let's see. Yeah, I have the afterword. Yes. So how about this? I like that. So I mean, so you're saying you're in favor of the afterword, of reading the afterword. Because if you're in favor of reading the afterword as well, then we'll just do chapter 10 and the afterword. Okay, there we go. Jolie says that's what she was trying to say. Okay, perfect. Then it is decided. All I will need is 40 eggs, 60 apples, and all of the milk for 2 weeks. And then we will do the afterward. And I think that's only fair, comrades, because my science. Emily says, so a mortgage payment? See, lad, you can do much better than that. 1 cup of milk and 1 green apple. Tactics. Sin says, best I can do is a granola bar. That's fair. There you go. See, Jenny knows what's up. See, Kat gave up the eggs. See, you're not supposed to give the eggs up. You're supposed to petition for those. Guys, this has really, really been cool. Like, even if, I mean, we had up to 90 people this time, up to 90. And I mean, look, even if it was like 20 people that showed up, it would still be a very, very big honor to be able to grow like this with you guys and then have the Discord. I mean, who knows how this thing is able to grow in the future? Um, but I am deeply, deeply looking forward to it. I'm going to shut this one down. We're at an hour and 28 minutes. Phantom with 10 gift memberships. You are the best. Thank you very, very, very much. Anybody who's willing to help out in any way, enjoy those memberships. Um, Subscribe, become a member, all of that good stuff. Um, I appreciate you guys. See you in just a couple of hours with Ren Chapter 7.